Today we are going to talk about bulk fermentation. So what I'm going to do is we're going to make what we call it our Italian-American hybrid for a pan dough. So we really want to work on making the best pan dough we can. So we're going to do a mixture of the Cinque Stagioni Superior or Blue Bag and Heritage European Artisan. Okay, they both have very similar properties. This one's a little bit weaker, but it's still strong enough to hold water. We're going to take it to a 63% hydration. We've bumped the yeast, we've bumped our oil so that we get a nice soft dough. And I'm going to add 90% of my water. I'm going to add my yeast. Now the reason that I'm using a mixture of American and Italian is because the Italian flour, because it's a 00, it's got a much finer grain size. So you tend to get a lighter, softer dough, whereas an American flour is milled a little bit differently and you tend to get a better crust formation. So we like to use the mixture because we like the benefits of both flours. So I whisked my yeast in. I'm going to add a little bit of malt just because we're going to do an overnight ferment. And I want to make sure that that yeast has a lot of food to be active on. I'm going to add my 00 Superior flour, my Heritage American strong bread flour. I'm going to set the mixer for 4 minutes. As you can see, we are mixing our flours in with our water, our malt, and our yeast. I'm going to add some more water. Now my water temp is important. I'm at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit because I don't want it too cold because I want the yeast to start working. And I want the dough to come out of the mixer around 23 Celsius, which is roughly 70 to 75 degrees. Still a little dry. Go ahead, a little bit more water. All right, we're about to go in a second speed here. See, the flour is all starting to be hydrated. Now we go second speed. Get a little more water. Go ahead and add our salt. Now the salt is going to do a couple things. It's going to add flavor, but it's also going to help relax and strengthen our gluten net so that we get a nice elastic dough that doesn't break very easily. Make sure we get all that salt in there. Okay. Now I'm going to hit this with a little bit of water so this dough starts to come together. A little bit of oil for elasticity and stretch and flavor. I want to let the dough start to come together before I add anything else. Add the rest of my water. A little bit more of my oil. So the proteins are weakening, but once they come back together a lot stronger. So this is the reason why I add the water later on. That, and I want to ensure that I dissolve that salt. So one thing we have to be careful about is our temperature rising because of the high friction factor of this. But in this case, I do want a little bit warmer dough as it comes out of the mixer so that that yeast is alive and active and working before we put it in the cooler. You can see the dough is coming back together. We're going to go ahead and add more oil. This is going to make the dough a lot softer because we have so much oil in it. But that's what we want in a good pan pizza. Okay, the oil's been absorbed. We're going to finish off our oil. All right, as you can see, our dough's coming together and we're starting to get our pumpkin form. The dough's a little bit tight. The longer we mix it, the better the gluten development, and it'll actually relax a little bit after a few minutes. So we will keep mixing. You can see the dough is starting to get a really nice pumpkin. Got another minute of mixing. I got good, strong gluten development. And then we're going to take it to the table. A little tight. I think you can go for another 2 minutes. It's been 2 minutes. We'll take a look. Much nicer. And that dough is nice and warm. Okay. Good gluten development. So now I'm going to take it out of the mixer and put it on the table. A little bit of wet hands. Tighten this dough ball back up. Good. Take my thermometer. Okay, so we're 30 degrees Celsius, which is about 86 degrees, which is good. It's good and warm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it in here 15 minutes covered, and then we will bulk it in the fridge. So the dough ball has come out at about 86 degrees, which is pretty warm, but that's okay because we're going to get good activity. Now by bulking it, it's going to keep that heat, and it's actually going to increase in heat as the yeast begins to work. So when the yeast starts consuming the sugars, exhaling ethyl alcohol and CO2, that actually creates heat. So by bulking it, you're increasing the activity of the dough for longer, whereas opposed to if you broke it down and balled it up and then put it in the fridge, it would cool down a lot faster and you wouldn't have that activity. So you'd have a slower, less developed dough the next day. So a lot of people will take advantage of bulking it like this because the dough continues to work for a couple of hours until the core of the dough reaches under 40 degrees, which then slows the activity of the yeast and slows the leavening. But this increases it by giving it more time to work before it gets too cold to go. It has been overnight. I pulled this out of the cooler about 2 hours ago, and as you can see, the bulk resting has done what it was supposed to do. It kept the internal temperature of the dough warmer a few hours after it had gone into the cooler. I did temp this before I went home last night at about 4:30, and it was still 70 degrees inside. So what had happened is this dough was still working hours after I had balled it and put it into the container, which increased the activity, increased the enzyme, increased the yeast life, didn't lengthen it, but increased the amount of yeast activity that we had going on. So next thing I'm going to do is we are going to portion this and put it in pans. Take this. Boom. Look at that beauty. What we're going to do is we're going to cut these, and then we are going to place them into, I've got some 16 by 16 Sicilian pans, which we are going to heavily coat in oil. Then we're going to oil up these grandma pans. I've got all the dough portioned out into these pans. I'm going to cover the speed rack with a cover, and then it's going to go back in the fridge overnight. We'll press these out tomorrow. Our pan dough has cold proofed in the walk-in cooler overnight. So now all I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to gently move this dough around, trying not to pop too many air bubbles. But we're going to press this out nice. Okay, get it to the edges. The dough is nice and relaxed. So we'll want to work, and it's going to have a lot of good flavor because we had that nice overnight ferment. Okay, so make sure that dough is pressed out nice and even to the edges. Okay, best to make sure that there's no air bubbles under the dough. I'm going to press out the rest of these. We're going to let them proof in the pan, and then we'll start baking.